Okay, so good morning, everyone. I hope we'll have a few more people who will join us in a few minutes to make sure that we get a lively discussion, not just between ourselves, but also with all of you. So we are here to put into context and explain a little bit the notion of intangible cultural heritage, how it applies in India, and of course, how the Eicher Foundation and Royal Enfield have become interested in partnering with UNESCO in this regard. I'll probably repeat a few things that you heard yesterday if you were there with us, but I think it's important in case some of you were not with us. So yes, I mean, UNESCO does a lot of things. We're active first and foremost, I would want to say, in the field of education. That's the E of UNESCO. We work in the sciences, natural sciences, social and human sciences. That's the S of UNESCO. And then we have the C of UNESCO, which stands for culture, but also communication. That's the area where we work in the field of freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and much more. So it's a very big mandate. But it's true that in India, like everywhere else, people know us first and foremost probably through the World Heritage sites. There are currently 40 World Heritage sites, and we work very closely with the government in this regard. It's quite a complicated UNESCO convention that sort of rules the World Heritage sites. I'm sure that number will grow in the years to come in India. But a little more than 20 years ago, member states of the organization also realized that, okay, it's a good thing to take care of monuments and natural sites through the Convention on the World Heritage Sites, but it's also very important, I was almost going to say more important, to try to see how to preserve the cultures, the living cultures around the world. With globalization, it's very important to realize that there's a huge pressure on communities all over the world, whether it is in South America, Africa, or Asia and the Pacific. You all know that many communities are actually in danger. First of all, they're not recognized properly. There's not a lot of information about what they represent, and much more. So that is why it was agreed internationally through a specific new UNESCO convention to recognize what became known as the intangible cultural heritage. It's a notion that initially, on the face of it, is a little bit difficult to understand, but as soon as you're exposed to it for 5 minutes, I think you quickly get it and then want to focus only on the living heritage. That certainly is my case. I become fascinated in the last 4.5 years with the incredible living heritage of India. I honestly think, and I say all the time, that India has more treasures in the field of intangible cultural heritage than any other country in the world. And it's fairly easy to prove in many ways. So again, what is intangible cultural heritage? Very quickly, and we have a little brochure that can be shared with some of you either electronically or we have a few copies. It refers first and foremost to oral traditions. That's one. It refers to the performing arts, dance, music, theater, and so on and so on. It refers to social practices, rituals, and festivals. It refers also, very important, to knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe. And finally, traditional craftsmanship, arts and crafts, so everybody, especially in India, quickly understands what it refers to. The convention has had a huge success, and there's a lot of people who are now specialized in this field, and I'm glad that Ritu is going to be speaking in just a minute about the importance of intangible cultural heritage in India. We have also a list when it comes to intangible cultural heritage that UNESCO maintains, so governments apply to be on that list, and you know that we have now currently 14 inscriptions on the representative list. It's called the representative list because, especially in the case of India, it's going to be absolutely impossible to ever have all of the practices inscribed. And that's not the idea anyway. It's just a list to give an indication of what is out there. And the list, again, maybe we'll talk about it later in a moment, is very useful but limiting. There's a lot of efforts that are made, first and foremost, as it should be, by the government of India to make sure that there is appropriate documentation of the intangible cultural heritage of the country. These efforts are ongoing. It's led, of course, first and foremost to the Ministry of Culture and various arms of the Ministry of Culture. I'm sure Ritu will say more about that in a moment. But there's also many other efforts. UNESCO is involved since several years now with the government of West Bengal to document and promote specific intangible cultural heritage practices of West Bengal. It has made a huge difference to thousands of artisans in very rural areas of West Bengal. In particular, and here I want to insist on this, on the livelihood of young women. We have seen through our project young women who may have been forced to move to cities and find or not find work, actually be able to stay in their communities and make a good living, and sometimes a very good living, through the programs that we have been able to implement with the government of West Bengal. More recently, we started to have a very similar program with the government of Rajasthan. By the way, in West Bengal, it's funded by the Ministry of State and Medium-Sized Enterprises, a long and barbaric acronym. Forgive me for not remembering the full name. In Rajasthan, it's a program funded by the Department of Tourism. Because in Rajasthan, the officials realize that there's a lot of visitors in Rajasthan, but at the same time, people don't stay very long. On average, a visitor, whether Indian or foreigner, will stay 1.5 nights in Rajasthan. That's nothing when you consider the wealth of things to see in Rajasthan. So we started this program, and one of the objectives is to actually double the length of stay of visitors, so push it to 3 nights if we can, which means also that we need to offer new incentives, new places to go to, new places to visit, things to see, including intangible cultural heritage practices. So in Rajasthan, our project focuses on the western part of the country, where very few people go. It's the desert areas, there's sometimes no accommodation, and nobody really knows what exists in terms of music, performing arts, and so on and so on. So if you're interested, we can also give you some information about what is going on there. I'm going there next week to sort of inspect the progress of the project, but it's making also a big difference. But it's only 2 states. We have worked also to mobilize other states. And I think the beauty of our partnership with Royal Enfield is that it's going to enable us to reach out in areas which are even harder to reach. You know, I mentioned yesterday that the Himalayas in general, for many obvious reasons, are hard to reach, and sometimes what better than a motorcycle to go and reach to these communities and try to understand what it is that they are doing to maintain their traditions, maintain their culture in all of the fields that I've just mentioned, whether it is music, weaving, arts and crafts, and much, much more. So it's particularly exciting to be able to work with Royal Enfield in this regard. And Bidisha will explain, hopefully, why they're excited to work with us also in return, to try to document, promote, and therefore help to safeguard what the communities in the Himalayas are doing. So this is sort of a quick overview. Again, I'm probably repeating a little bit of what we said yesterday. And now I want to give the floor to Ritu and ask us to explain a little bit the efforts of the various stakeholders. And we'll go back to the issue of who should be involved, because that's why I'm saying various stakeholders. Ritu has worked for many years in the field of ICH, and she is perhaps the most prominent expert in this field. So she knows the field very, very well. So Ritu, tell us more about ICH in India. What is being done to safeguard?
Well, Eric is always a hard act to follow because he is so articulate and his thinking is so organized, but I'm going to try and do my best. So thank you, Eric, for this very complicated question, because many of the things that he has actually touched on is what we are attempting to do in India in other places also. But I want to start with a bit of history. And that is, when the convention was introduced in 2003, India was one of the first few signatories of it. But it did take us here time to understand the phrase intangible cultural heritage, because to and also to disseminate it across this vast country. Now, the culture of this country has always been invested in its people. And at the end, we do talk about our 5,000-year history. But given that, we also have a 3,500-kilometer coastline. We have 6 climatic regions. We have more than 460 tribes. We have more languages than can be counted. We have so many events and festivals. So, how do we document? How do we advantage? How do we get down to it? So, all this took us in India time to understand, because a convention had been put together, I think, over a period of 2 or 3 years with so much thought. And they actually put the community at the core of it, that these traditions are, I use the word ownership carefully, but they are the ownership of the communities because they are living traditions. So, and the previous panel too talked about this when they said a community is not homogeneous, it is not a monolith. So it is very difficult actually to document and to follow the very spirit of the convention. Having said that, I think we have in the last decade really jumped onto it and are keenly wanting to move on. But I also feel that while government is making a huge effort, it is also all of us as citizens, as corporations, that have to also pitch in, because we are more related to where we work at the grassroots. And I saw the list of people that Bidisha had put together, their partners. And my goodness, they are doing remarkable work, but very few people even know about them. So this venture in the Himalayan region, and like I said, we have 6 climatic regions. Eric has talked about the desert, he's talked about Bengal, but how marvelous that something is being done in the Himalayan regions, which are hard to access. The other thing I want to touch upon is one of the most important things I feel that the ICH convention puts forward, and that is the actual inventorying. And while the government has made an effort, one of the things that we have been constantly telling the government is that there is inventories that exist. They exist at the smallest grassroots levels. Let us at least put together the list of those who inventory. And on the basis of that, we formulate the larger list. While we chase the representative list, there are only 14. And it is a slow process, it's an international process. Let us advantage ourselves by having our own indigenous Indian representative list. Yes, it is crucial and critical to have it on this remarkable convention, because then it is highlighted to the world. But we ourselves must have an Indian representative list, which is long and powerful and remains a work in progress. And I say that from personal experience because I work with the Craft Revival Trust. And many, many years ago, we started inventorying the crafts. And I thought this is going to be a short process. And we are still doing it. There is just too much to be done in this vast country with 1.6 billion people, each one carrying their own tradition. So while we have inventory 3,500 arts and crafts, it's like continues to be a work in progress. And there are hundreds of micro stories of where sustainable issues have been taken up with small communities. Perhaps that is another area that needs to be deeply looked in, to put up all these stories, small videos, small thoughts. So these are the things we try and push with government, that look at all these areas. Let us also advantage people who have smaller voices. And that is why when I heard about what Royal Enfield was doing and the kind of partners they had, I thought, how marvelous. In this manner, perhaps other organizations will follow and we will find more flowers blooming. 1,000 blooms maybe. So I will now hand it back to Eric.
Thank you. Just very quickly, for those who don't know, we can maybe say a few words about some of the items that are on the list so that you also understand better. So Ramlila was the first, which was inscribed in 2008. That's the traditional performance of the Ramayana. I think that was the first one that was proposed by India to be on the list. Tradition of Vedic chanting, originating obviously from the region that we are most interested in today, was inscribed also in 2008. You notice that it's 2 inscriptions in 2008. Since then, there have been some limitations on the number of inscriptions any country can suggest on a given year. Now it's only 1 per year. It's the same for World Heritage Sites, by the way. So the progression cannot go now from 14 to 22 next year. It can only go from 14 to 15, and so on and so on. Kutiyatam, Sanskrit theater, was inscribed also in 2008. And then Raman, religious festival and ritual theater of the Himalayas, was inscribed. Then we started to have a little bit more diversity with Chow dance in 2010. We had Kalbelia, of course, in Rajasthan in 2010, and Mudiyetu the same year. Then that's when it started sort of slowing down in terms of the speed of the inscription. The Buddhist chanting of Ladakh was inscribed. Sankirtana, ritual singing, drumming, and dancing of Manipur. Sorry. Then we had a traditional brass and copper craft of utensil making. Yoga, at the request of the Prime Minister, was inscribed in 2016. That's a little bit of a different category than others because yoga is, of course, celebrated around the world. But I think the intention was to demonstrate, which is obvious for many, of course, that yoga was born and is still very, very much alive here. And then we had a series of festivals. Kumbh Mela was inscribed in 2017. Durga Puja was inscribed in 2021, another festival. And it's not a secret that India has submitted Garba for inscription in 2022. That's 3 festivals in a row. I hope it will stop, personally, that not to be quoted, but I think it's nice to have festivals, but in the end, there's so much more than these festivals. Festivals happen only once a year. Personally, I prefer the celebration of crafts that are happening throughout the year, like the brass instruments that was inscribed not so long ago. Anyway, just to give you a glimpse of what is on the representative list. And again, it's only one part of what we are all trying to do in the field of intangible cultural heritage. So Ritu has mentioned stakeholders. It's obvious that the government is the first owner of the inventory and the process that goes to UNESCO. But there's many more people who are engaged, and I'm very happy to see people who are obviously coming from different fields here today. We had many more also yesterday. I think civil society in general is obviously key because we will never say enough that ICH is about communities. It's about people at the grassroots. It's not about foreigners coming in there and you know, grabbing for whatever purpose these practices. The ownership of intangible cultural heritage rests with the communities. It is central to the UNESCO convention. But others can join in, and that's where indeed, a new actor has come to the fore also in the last few years in a way that didn't happen before. And I'm glad that there's a realization in the private sector that they have a responsibility too. At UNESCO, we've tried to, as best we can, because sometimes we're a bit grappling in the dark, identify these stakeholders in the private sector who might be interested in working with us. In this regard, I want to mention IHCL, the Taj Group of Hotels, who indeed decided to join us in celebrating intangible cultural heritage practices throughout the country. The idea is that when you go to a Taj hotel, you're given, well, yes, the key to your room, but you're also given information about where you might be visiting an ICH practice not too far from the hotel. It's just starting. We are starting with 10 ICH practices at Taj Hotels in India. They have pledged by the end of this year to boost it to 40 practices that people can visit at Taj Hotels, hopefully before the end of this year, and so on, and so on, and so on. If the Taj does it, it's a market leader. You know that others will do it. And we're already seeing a number of hotels and groups, some of whom we're going to sign agreements with very soon, who want to do the same thing. Because, yes, they feel that the times are changing, that there is, we all need to work towards a better and sustainable future, and that it means, as part in particular of corporate social responsibility, conducting actions for the communities that they were not doing in the past. So IHCL was a very good partner for us. We also partnered with Netflix to try to sensitize, in particular, the younger generations about intangible cultural heritage. And I'm very, very happy that I can't say that we convinced, because as soon as we talked about it, Bidisha said, but yes, of course, we will be part of it. And not only did they say that, but they have done it, well, in the way that you see this week with the event yesterday and a series of panel discussion. And I know that they are committed for the long term. So the question, Bidisha, you know, and I'm sure it's the question of many people here, why? Why would Royal Enfield even be interested in working with us in this area?
Well, thank you, Eric. And Ritu, thank you for the kind words earlier. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Well, you know, some of you, like Eric said, were here yesterday, and possibly you heard Siddharth and Mohit and others talk about this. I'll try to address the question that you have asked, specifically for Royal Enfield. But before I get to Royal Enfield, it's really about, you talked about stakeholders and corporates and corporate social responsibility, really, right? See, I think the private sector, the corporates have a fairly substantial role to play. There is a certain amount of power of influence that the corporate sector can bring to the table, and without trying to claim to be an expert in what they are not, they can try and play the role of a catalyst, right? They can try and do that. Ritu, you were mentioning earlier about our partners, and I a lot of them are here in the audience today. There were so many. Malika, Rita is here. Ritu, everyone, Namgel, they were all in the panel earlier as well. I think what we intend to do at Royal Enfield and at Eicher Group Foundation is not to try and mess with their work. And I'm choosing my words carefully here, because I think they are experts. They know what they need to do and how they need to interact with the community, how do they need to work with the community. Our role really is not even only limited to being a funder, because that is really the easiest thing to do. But first and foremost, I think Royal Enfield and Eicher Group Foundation is a learning organization. We are learning every day. We are learning with our partners. We are learning with our communities. We are learning with experts. We are learning with you all. And that's really the role that we can play. We can learn as we go ahead. We can try and partner with experts, people who are working at the grassroots level, and hopefully be part of a change, make a difference. Now, coming to intangible cultural heritage. Now, really it started with our huge interest in the Himalayas, and unlike conventional CSR thinking, Himalayas is not the biggest market for us, for Royal Enfield. We don't sell the maximum number of motorcycles in the Himalayas, right? I mean, those will be, different other urban regions. And many a times we get asked also that, so why are you not focusing on places where you sell the most? I think some of that got answered yesterday. Himalayas is really what Royal Enfield considers its spiritual home, and therefore the interest in Himalayas. We also know that we have been, riders, whether with us or on their own, just because of the character of the Royal Enfield motorcycles. They've been using these bikes to ride up to the mountains, and we do realize that it's a fragile ecosystem. We do realize that you need to do it mindfully, you need to do it responsibly. Will that happen overnight? Absolutely not. But do we therefore do nothing, and do we not even make a beginning? I suppose we should. So that's really where we are. I mean, it's really about our interest in the Himalayas, and also trying to partner the communities in a meaningful way. So there is, our work in the Himalayas is not limited to intangible cultural heritage, but it ends up becoming a very big part of the work, or let's say the intent, which is really a long term intent, because ultimately it's about people, it's about the communities, and all of these things that Ritu you were talking about, the richness of the traditions, the lived, I would say, knowledge that's passed from generation to generation. Unless you do something to capture it, unless you do something to document it, to enable the communities to engage with it in a meaningful manner, you know you will, it's really about being able to help in any little way that we can to make sure that these communities are thriving. So that's really what interested us, and when we came to you, Eric, and we spoke about it, and you said, let's talk about intangible cultural heritage, and I said the Himalayas, and I think that was it. That was really the start of this partnership. Yeah.
Indeed, indeed. Ritu, when you try to document intangible cultural heritage, and you've been doing so for many, many years, what are some of the obstacles or challenges in general that you encounter of various kinds?
Well, it's, what we have been trying to do actually is build small inventories. You perhaps need anthropologists, you need people rooted in the ground who, because so much of the knowledge is tacit, it is not even expressed. Even when questioned, it is not put forward. So, what you see is perhaps a technique, a process, a day that such and such happens in. But what I've seen is that the best documentation happens when someone lives with the community. And now the wonderful thing is, through UNESCO, I think, which is really promoting it in a very big way, is the self-documentation by communities, especially with the coming of smartphones and other mechanical and cheaper devices that communities can get hold of themselves, that they can take their own pictures, and they can therefore, young people have taken to this in an amazing way, and therefore what you get is so much richer than what somebody who goes in for a few days can get. But what we have attempted to do is actually at least create a listing with brief paragraphs which says, hey, this exists. Because when we started, we didn't even know what existed. Books were few, out of print, out of date, and now there's reams available online, but we don't know how accurate it is. So I think this endeavor at inventorying and listing that UNESCO has introduced is really the great starting point. And it focuses people's attention that this is there. And if you're in the area, even if you don't know exactly where it is, but it interests you, find them.
Okay, because there is no actual complete repository or inventory of all these practices. I'm sure everybody here knows that, but it's important to remind ourselves on this. And there's a particular dearth of information about the Himalayas, Bidisha?
Yeah, and honestly, this partnership, I mean, you talked about the representative list earlier, Eric, and our partnership is not necessarily looking at the representative list at all, right? I mean, it is really about creating this repository that Ritu was talking about earlier, and doing it in a manner where the community owns, and where the community is really sort of they own the story, they are able to share their stories. And it becomes, in some ways, a guide for travelers, for riders, for whoever is going into that region to engage maybe with that, that practice. Uh, our intent, really, I mean, what we've been trying to do is to look at documenting, to begin with, to look at documenting 100 practices in the northeastern region, in the northeastern Himalayas, and eastern Himalayas rather, and we're already, we've made some progress there already. I think the interesting what this partnership, why it is really interesting also, is because this documentation process is not necessarily being done only by experts, if I can say so, but also people who we hope will engage with these practices, which is travelers, which is, riders. They are they have an opportunity to play an active role in actually documenting this, in really engaging with this in a meaningful manner. That's the unique part, I think, of what we are trying to do. Hopefully, once Eric talked about the ride, etc., yesterday, and end of September, we are looking at flagging off a ride where we will have people going out to the Eastern Himalayas, engaging with the communities, hopefully coming back with stories, with videos, and they will be hopefully equipped with smartphones and a bit more. So to really get that all that content out, and then next year it will be the Western Himalayas, I think.
Okay, I think it's time to give a chance to members of the audience to ask questions. I hope you have some. So who would like to be the first one? Yes, please, sir. Remember to introduce yourself, yeah?
Eastern Himalaya. We've done projects in Eastern Himalaya and Sikkim particularly. And in the state of Sikkim, the central artery, the life support system of the state, used to be the Tista, which has been butchered. There are 6 hydel channels on the Tista now, and those old timers like us who used to put in for rafting at Dikchu, now to come down to Coronation Bridge. What is the impact of this in your study? Have you taken a look at natural resources?
I'm sorry, this is actually out of my domain completely, but we do know that this is happening across the country. That with the pressure of population, with the pressure of urbanization, with this concentration on GDP and moving ahead and globalization, yes, I think we are all here aware of how ecology is being transformed, mountains are being transformed. But I don't think this is something that any of us can even deal with. It is done at such a different policy level that it bothers all of us as citizens.
May I just add to what you're saying? And that is that the literature on this subject today is full of pledges. Pledges that we pledge to do this and pledge to do that. A pledge, in my view, is really a very limp statement of what you want to aspire to. The time has now come when you need to link in with technology and create a governance system which can measure impacts. Otherwise, you'll be talking in abstract terms.
Okay.
Not meant to
I'm
dampen
not sure it relates directly to our discussion today, but thank you for your comment. Anybody else would like to ask a question or make a comment? Yeah?
Actually, it's a very interesting point, and I can find a bridge between what you're saying and what Sir's come up with. And in the process of some of the work we are doing, there are youth from the Lepcha community. Actually, the Lepcha is also part of that landscape where the Tista flows from. And some of the Lepchas actually are very, very, when you talk about community ownership, are very proud of each and every aspect of their lives, linked to nature, linked to their traditions. And they, in fact, did not want the dam, and they've tried for years to kind of preserve what they have, because for them, the river is their life. That's where they go when they die. So there can be a bridge somewhere where UNESCO, where you're talking about intangible heritage. How can we bring their voices and the government together somewhere? I don't know, it's the most difficult thing to do, and it's not the ideal situation, but maybe through some process, maybe it could be a beginning. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. If I understand correctly, I mean, the link to nature is very, very strong in the 2003 UNESCO Convention on Intangible Cultural Heritage. It certainly is encouraged to identify and try to help safeguard practices related to nature. It's a very important element for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and
If I could just add to what Eric has said, I feel also that the time is now past to constantly say somebody should do this, government should do this. But we are also somebody. And I feel that maybe in small communities there should be citizen charters. And citizens are now powerful because we can connect however distant we are in location because of the power of the internet. Citizen charters that go up to powers and go up to policymakers to say, as people, as residents, this is what we want. So I think the time has come not to say somebody. I think we've got to do it. And I feel that strongly about civil society also, that we have to have a civil society charter on what we should do for our ground, our earth, our communities. And same way, you've given this amazing example of the Lepcha community. Perhaps a citizen charter that formalizes what they're doing so that they can do things that others can't do and make a difference themselves.
yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, and I mean, Rita mentioned the Lepcha community, and we've been working with Green Hub even on this project. I think one of our intention is very much to not just stick to the more known, let's say, festivals like what Eric was saying, at least in the Himalayan region, but to also look at stories and practices like this, right? So it is the whole idea of identifying 100 practices to begin with in the eastern part and then moving to the western Himalayas is really to try and look at the broad range of how Eric defined intangible cultural heritage and not stick to only one aspect of it. Our larger program is really about looking at working with 100 Himalayan communities in a really holistic way to create sustainable living spaces, etc. So that is where this ties in very beautifully for us, right? Because unless you look at the question of ecology, unless you look at the question of, what are the practices linked to nature, I think it will be an incomplete exercise.
Okay. Ritu, I know you had a question for Bidisha.
Yes. Well, belonging to civil society, we do go up to corporates all the time asking for CSR funds for our projects. And it's very hard to explain to them what ICH is because at the end, they want to see hard numbers. How many are you impacting? How is it increasing livelihoods? In how much time will you be able to show an increase of from A to B? And by the end of it, it's like not easy. So we do manage sometimes. So I was very keen to know how Royal Enfield decided to work in an area which is intangible in more ways than one. Even in the deliverables, it's intangible. Outcomes and outputs are largely intangible. But somewhere you are changing mindsets. So I asked Bidisha that earlier, and now Eric wants me to ask it publicly so she can tell us how and why.
Well, I only hope, Ritu, that we don't have anyone from the compliance team sitting here, right? From our compliance, I hope not. So, no, I was telling Ritu earlier that half of my time really, all this is super interesting stuff, but half of my time really goes in explaining to the board and to the compliance teams and all, and again then telling my partners that don't worry, it's okay, they're asking for another report, but we'll get there, don't worry. So but yeah, but really, but more seriously speaking, I think yes, you're right. The CSR laws currently that we have and what the law requires us to do, I'm sure for the right reasons, to look at compliance and that the money is well spent, etc., is actually quite strict, and it's also changing at a rapid pace. So as corporates, as CSR teams, we have to really keep up with that, and every day there is a new interpretation and a new report and a new kind of format that comes our way. So we struggle with that as much before also kind of bringing on board our partners. But quite honestly, like I said, our thinking on CSR, I would like to believe, has been slightly unconventional. Like I said, mostly you will have CSRs focusing on areas where they have their footprint. So the factories where you manufacture, and we do some stuff there as well. That's something that we certainly do, which we near our factories in for Royal Enfield in Chennai, and for the V commercial vehicles division in Indore. But really a large part of our focus has been the Himalayas, and within the Himalayas, I think, being the brand that Royal Enfield is, it is a brand which is also fairly storied, if I can say, and there is a large part of the intangible element in the Royal Enfield brand as well. So I think there was a natural sort of fit in what we wanted to do. I hope I'm able to answer the board and the compliance teams, in a way that I don't lose my job. But but we'll get there. But I think this is also, someone's got to make a start, right? I mean, there is the law also allows you to interpret it, as long as you have the right set of ideas, and as long as you can maintain your standards of compliance and ethics and all of that. I think if you have the right intention, you can kind of make hopefully set an example. That's what.
Well, I have a question for Eric, because he's been questioning all of us. So, Eric, I have been associated with UNESCO for a long time, but I have never seen the office shaken as it has since you came. And all your partnerships, is it usual? Because with the Taj Group, with Royal Enfield, and I feel it is setting a huge example, because to also get partnership from UNESCO implies that there is international recognition to the program. So do you have a long queue of people waiting to meet you and ask for this, or is it very difficult? Are there lots of compliances you have to follow before you sign up? So
yeah. Well, there's always a long queue of people who want to work with us. Sometimes not the people we want to work with, but it's another story. It's like for everybody else. The key is that UNESCO, like every international organization over the last 20 years, has changed enormously. We were, for instance, 30 years ago, a well-funded organization where we could sometimes support ourselves financially a number of ventures. These times are gone. We have gone through a series of periods where we have lost a huge part of our revenue. Remember that these are this is money given by governments, so this is reduced to the point that there was a realization also a few years ago that we need to work better with partners. 20 years ago, we didn't work very well with civil society organizations. We were supposed to be an intergovernmental organization. So we didn't work with civil society, we didn't work with private sector. The whole UN world has been turned upside down in this regard. And for financial but also other reasons, in order to be more inclusive, we have turned to different partners. Some of my colleagues complain that it's very difficult. I claim otherwise. I think that it's relatively easy, especially in India. India has been, in my view, very fertile grounds for UNESCO in many ways. We have excellent name recognition. There's a very large group of civil society organizations, private sector companies who are potentially interested to work with us if we approach them. So I think it's also about us becoming more approachable, organizing events like this where we can create fora for interaction. I'm sure just on the basis of the events today, I've already had a number of people calling me or writing to me, and there will be many more. And out of all these contexts, maybe there will be new partnerships created. So the whole outlook and identity of all UN organizations, and in this case I represent UNESCO, has changed. I think in India, a number of factors have been very positive. The CSR Act, I must say, was groundbreaking. To my knowledge, it doesn't exist anywhere else, at least to the extent it was structured here. So it has given a huge boost to the notion of CSR and also to the redistribution of resources to society at large. In the case of our partnership, UNESCO does not receive funding from Royal Enfield and vice versa, but there can be funds expended to organize events in the context of this partnership, and it makes a huge difference. On our own, we would not be able to organize a week of events like this. So I hope I'm answering your question, but it's yes, about extending a hand and trying to sort of adhere to the world that we live in today. The world we live in today is not the world of 1945 when the UN and UNESCO was created. We all need to work together in order to make a difference and in order to create the sustainable future that our children want and that so far we haven't really delivered on. But yes, I think there's a wave that is worth riding, and I hope many of you will ride it. Yes.
My name is Niels Peter Jensen from Germany. Founder of Helmets for India. I just want to underline your question concerning working with Royal Enfield or speaking about that it's very hard to find people who support you with your idea, and the more crazy the idea gets or the bigger the problem is, the less people are willing to talk to you or giving you support, not just financial wise, also like support by doing events like this. So the first 1.5 years doing my charity project, Helmets for India, it was just basically look at my bank account and saying, okay, I got 50 euros, I can put it into there and I can put some money into this. So I just basically spent all my money, and because there was no brand really who wanted to support me with the project, because I said, Niels, it's a big country, how are you going to make a change? You will never ever make a change. And I said, yes, I will. Believe me, one day. I remember we met 2019 in London, and I think it was just one meeting, maybe 4 or 5 emails, and Royal Enfield said straight, yes, we don't care about numbers, we don't care about this or that, we are on board. Of course, it took a while before we signed contracts because there's a lot of paperwork to be done, but Royal Enfield, I don't think really, if it comes to these kind of things that we all do, it's not about numbers, it's about the vision, it's about the problem that needs to be solved. And Royal Enfield and all the employees, they understand they have only a chance to do it if we do it in a community with the right people. And so just to underline your cooperation at UNESCO and Royal Enfield, I think it's the most amazing thing I've seen for the past 48 years of my life. And I needed to come here to see it in life. And from my experience, yes, this is the right partner, Royal Enfield and UNESCO. And I think it's just not about numbers. So.
Thank you, Niels.
We'll try not to disappoint you. Okay. Anyone else? Otherwise, we started very late, so we probably need to conclude fairly soon.
Okay. Thanks, Eric. My name is Sevang Namgyal. I'm coming from Ladakh. So what kind of intangible cultural heritages are you looking for to be inscribed on the list? There are so many, there are probably millions actually across. And one thing that really came to my mind while hearing about Lachen and Lungchen and some of the systems in Sikkim is this grassroots level governance system, which is very important, that can really enable a lot of other and preservation of a lot of other intangible cultural heritages. If we manage to inscribe something like that on the list, that is very important. And similarly, we also have a system in Ladakh called the GOBA system, which is going very strong actually, despite all the forces that have been trying to undermine the grassroots level the governance system. So do you think something like that would make a strong candidate to be on the list?
Okay, so first of all, UNESCO doesn't want anything in particular to get inscribed. It's really for you to determine at the community level and to channel it to the appropriate authorities. Because yes, we are first and foremost an intergovernmental organization, and any official request has to come from the government of India through its representation, its ambassador at UNESCO. So it's not us deciding in any way, shape, or form. It is sort of a grassroots level up type of effort. The second very important point that I want to make is that the list is not an end in itself. I have to mention the list because everybody is interested in it, but it's only 14 so far, and it's only going to grow very, very slowly. So the likelihood that any one of the thousands of practices of India to get inscribed is very, very, very low. What is important is that it gets recognized at the grassroots level, within the region, within the country, and hopefully beyond. So it is an effort that can take many forms. But yes, organization at the grassroots level is very, very important. If you have an inventory at the level of Ladakh, which I'm not sure, but what I heard you say, that's already very important. And it will be very useful eventually to feed into the official mechanisms at the national level. I don't know if anyone can complement what I said, but I haven't seen, for instance, an inventory at the level of Ladakh. Ritu?
In fact, you're absolutely right, Eric. And in fact, that is our constant advice in any policy meeting to Government of India. That while we are focused on that one element which goes onto the representative list, what about the millions of elements that exist? Let us have an equally strong Indian representative list, state-wise, union territory-wise, so the process within the country is strengthened and all these practices are actually listed already. While the world's eye is focused first on the UNESCO list, the second eye is focused on a country's inventory list. So how marvelous that a country like India has a really vibrant inventory with all the details on a website for anyone within and outside to see it, knowing that only one can be put on the representative list of UNESCO per year. So we have been saying this for a long time.
And if I can, Eric and Ritu, I think, Namgyal, I think one of the things that we are trying to do, and of course, along with you all, is to also try and build this narrative and, elevate the pitch a little bit, right? So while the representative list will only take as many, and there will be a lot of process and stuff that you'll have to go through. Once we put together our, let's say, lists, either you can let it be on a website alone, or you can do stuff around it which tells that story, and hopefully in a way that brings people together, hopefully in a way that inspires many more people, right? So I think communication, and for all of you all are actually custodians and experts of the living heritage, right? And we're talking about Himalayas today. I think we owe this to ourselves and to the collective to be able to elevate this pitch a little bit and hopefully come up with interesting ways of communicating. So this event and why we decided to go ahead with a format like this was one of the, like the thought process behind this. And everyone, I have to mention that we've had like a long list of partners who really pulled their weight in very short time to put this program together. I mean, I don't think Royal Enfield or EGF can take the credit at all. It's really all the partners, the artists, the curators who've really come together to put this event. It's very much a collective effort. So quite honestly, as I think that if we carry on that path, work together, there will be enough stories that come out and reach people. I think, that can happen.
So if
To go just a little bit further, I really almost want to say, forget the list. That's not what is important. Let me give you the example, and of course we are here in Bikaner House, which and the strong link to Rajasthan. I want to mention the project that we have in Rajasthan. I mentioned it earlier. We're working with the Department of Tourism. The Department of Tourism wants to work with us to help them, according to certain UNESCO methodology, to just know what is out there in Western Rajasthan, because they don't know what exists. So we are currently mapping the ICH practices in Western Rajasthan, the musical practices, the textile-related practices, and other ICH traditions that exist in Western Rajasthan, which have not been documented anywhere. So the issue here is to document, to help promote, and to safeguard, to recognize, so that, because it's the Department of Tourism, they can construct circuits to bring visitors to these regions and help, in turn, the livelihood of these people in Western Rajasthan. Currently, again, there's very little information, and it's very similar in the Himalayas. So we're looking forward to discover, better explore what is out there together with Royal Enfield, and hopefully it will be fruitful, beneficial for the communities.
In fact, I will just add that that is one of the things we do at the office I work in, is that we have listed and written a bit about over 3,500 arts and crafts. And we have posted it on to the encyclopedia we call Asia Inch Encyclopedia, which is free for everyone to read, that at least be aware this exists in this region. And then hoping that people work further and deeper in these areas.
Okay, one last question.
Thank you. My name is Fayaz and I'm from Kashmir, and I just have a brief question about the educational aspect. I mean, it's great to see, as I've said earlier, to be part of this sort of partnership and as a community sort of partner. But so we are working with, for example, the tourism department, we're working with the MSME, the industry. But I think, as I said in my presentation, and from my experience, I see a lot of the value of the heritage is lost through the experience of schooling and early childhood for people. This thought is also coming to my mind, for example, UNESCO and people like us know more about certain things for a particular context than the people who are in there. The children, for example, are not being exposed to the value of these things, the ICH. So I was just wondering, the question is there an educational element to UNESCO's work, or are you seeing that in the future of this work? Thank you.
That's a very good question. I think you're looking at sort of an ideal scenario where eventually ICH is recognized in textbooks and personalized, so to speak, to each region, so that students indeed can be proud of the traditions and the culture of their own regions. I'm not sure that any country in the world has really been able to do that. There's so many. It's a very different discussion. I recognize a very important point. There's so many aspects to education right now which are extremely complicated. But yes, I hope one day we can go to that level. It would be ideal.
Yeah. And Faiz, if I may add, so we have been trying to a little pilot that we've run. That in fact, Sevang Dolma here, she's the program manager in Ladakh. She's been running this, which we call the alternative learning space. So we do try to bring a slightly different element, to students. Today, interestingly, I'm told that we had students from schools who were there attending the previous session. I mean, at least for this event, I know that we've reached out to all different, educational institutions as well, because I mean, we do realize what you're saying. I think it'll be extremely interesting to see how do students today, the younger generation, actually engage with this. I think they're interested. They're interested much more than our generation or previous generations were in the question of sustainability, in the question of community, and I think that's a good start. Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we've come to the conclusion of this panel. I thank you very much for being here with us. I hope you'll continue to be present for the other events. We're obviously trying to shine a spotlight on various aspects. But again, a big thank you.